Welcome to another episode of Expected Buffalo, and we are back with a mailbag session. It's been a few weeks since, maybe even like a month since we've actually done one. And since usually we do it on Thursday, but this Thursday, if you don't recall, is the second mock off season. So I get to be the general manager. Anthony puts everything together and he brings out his fun voices, which I know a lot of people look forward to. So that will be Thursday. So as a result, and I feel like I owe people, a mailbag episode here since it's been a little bit. I'm a little behind on that one. That we would do it here on a Tuesday. Stick with the T's, but not Thursday. Tuesday this time. So I have 9 questions around a variety of topics that I will go through here over the next however long this goes. So thank you very much for joining me on, I guess you could say late on a Tuesday night. But first, of course, mailbag episodes, whether it be on Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, or any day of the week, is brought to you by our wonderful sponsor, Hiller Commerford. You could check them out at hillercommerford.com, your local injury and disability law firm. You can call them at 1-866-HILLER-LAW. If you're in trouble, those are the people to call. All right. So like I said, 9 questions or comments or topics or however you would like to describe that. So we will go through those. I'll pop the questions on the screen for those of you that are watching it live. For those of you that are podcast folk listening to this back, I will read the questions out so you will be able to hear them. And then we'll go through it and have some fun and see where the conversation goes from there. All right, our first one of the day goes to Zach. The question is, what are your realistic roster wishes or goals that would make you genuinely optimistic about ending the drought? I figured this one was a good one to start with because it I guess is a wide-ranging question that we can use to drive us down into the further, more detailed topics that we'll get into. For me, it's weird. I don't have any specific, like, hardcore, really want that guy. I mean, I guess maybe Jason Robertson would be that guy that would be at the top of my list for me. I know it's not a defenseman, but I just think he would check off a lot of boxes for this team, being at a forward and even improving their team defense, that he would be an important get. So I think that, and it's realistic because his name appears to be out there, I think he would be the one that's at the top of my list. But really, the goal, I think, of this offseason to make me genuinely optimistic about next season is going to have to be some sort of drastic rebuilding or change to the defense group. And it's not just trading Connor Clifton and bringing somebody in or something small like that. I think there needs to be at least 2 new players on this blue line for me to have genuine belief that this team will be better defensively. And, there's other things too, the special teams and goaltending and even some stuff, being better defensively as a forward group. Those are all important. But I think at the top of the list is defense. And if you don't improve your defense, your blue line, then realistically, I just can't have any belief that this team can push into the playoffs, no matter how many goals they've scored. We've seen it in the past. They could score a ton. They could score with the best of them at 5-on-5, but it still doesn't result in them making the playoffs. And again, like I said, it's not just the defense game. It's the other stuff around it too that has impacted that. But I think if you can be better defensively, if your power play doesn't take a significant step, if your goaltending isn't top 5 in the league or something, if it's average, I think if you improve your team defense, it is going to make it easier on you on a night-to-night basis that allows you not to have to score 4 or 5 goals to win a hockey game and to be comfortable with that. And nights that your offense might not be up to it, maybe your defense can get you in a nice 2-1 game and you can be on your way and win a couple of games that way. Which is something the Sabres have not done over the last few years, is win those low-scoring, close games. So really, for me to have genuine optimism about next season and them being a playoff team, I think that is where it's going to have to start with me. And it's funny, I say that, and of course, the guy that I my top wish is a forward, but again, that goes back to the whole team defense aspect that I think he would play into beyond uh, just what he would give you from an offensive standpoint. All right, next question. Good question from Zach. This one comes in from Derek. Considering you and others have heard Buffalo is looking to snag a late first in a trade for Byram, is them using that pick in another trade something you've heard being talked about? Now, this is a fun conversation to have. Because initially, I know a lot of people's reactions is you hear the Sabres are interested in another first-round pick, and you're like, "What are we doing here? We don't need any more futures," and all of that. I completely understand that line of thinking. I completely understand that logic. Yeah. Why would you need another late first-round pick? Let me kind of give you the reasoning what I believe is behind it. I think there are a few things. I think one of the reasonings behind it is that it could give them some flexibility in this draft if they wanted to move up, if they wanted to make 9 available, that they would have another first round pick later in the draft in their pocket that they could utilize. Another reason why is I think if you look at their system, and I just did an article about where they stand, especially from a defensive standpoint, is I think they want to try to add some juice to their pipeline defensively. And picking up another late round first, because most likely to stay at 9, I would be pretty surprised if they don't take a forward. And that's not just because of where they are and what they want to do. I think that's just when you look at the top of the board and in that spot, it's forward heavy. Once you kind of get past Schaefer, I'm not sure there's another defenseman that really I would consider taking at 9. There's some people who have different beliefs. But for me, I think with how, the upside the forward pool gives you, that's probably what you're going to go towards if you stay at 9. Now, if you move back a couple picks or more into the mid first round, depending on what you would do, that of course could change things, and that brings defense back into the picture. The third thing that I think getting another first round pick can do is they can then utilize it to flip for another thing, as Derek is calling out here. So overall, I think it gives them flexibility of another asset that they can use to make a pick, use to improve their prospect pool in an area of need, and 3, give them flexibility to make a trade with it. If I'm being completely honest with you, I think if they were to acquire another late first round pick in this trade scenario for Bo Byram that we're talking about here, I think it's probably likely they would just make the pick. And you probably don't want to hear that, but that's just my sense. It could be wrong. It's also the possibility they don't get that late first round pick in a trade that they're going to make, but they're open to it essentially. That much I do know. I know they talked to a few teams that have multiple first round picks about that idea. So we'll see how that plays out here or when that gets finalized. Really, with Byram, I think we're just playing a matter of time game here. I feel pretty confident saying they've decided what they're doing there. They've had enough conversations. They know what the market is. They know the teams that are involved, and they know the teams that are seriously involved at this point. And I would anticipate either before the draft or on the draft, that Byram is moved ahead of July 1st before the free agent market opens. So don't got to worry about any goofy offer sheet stuff potentially. They can get a trade executed, and I think it's one of the first things they'll look to check off their list here in the offseason as we move forward. So more to come on that. We will see where that all goes and plays out. I am not as opposed to it as long as they do opposed to the first round pick, I should say. As long as they do other things, and it's ideally I would like them to use it as an asset to flip to get something else or to use as a throw in. But I think logically, if you think it all the way through and get past the frustration of another futures asset, it does make some sense for where they are. As long as you use it for a defenseman. If they grab 2 forwards in the first round, then that definitely is a redundancy and something you have to question. All right, next one. This one comes from Matthew talking about defense partners for Dahlin and Power. I was curious your ideal partners for Dahlin and Power. Ideal partners. Well, I'll start with Power because I think I have one, and I don't know how realistic it is, but I brought it up in a mock off season. I brought it up in a trade scenario for a specific team that I've written about. But I've kicked around ideas. I don't know if he's available. There's really no rumors that says that he is or talk that he is. But I think if you were able to get Jonas Brodin for the Minnesota Wild, that would be a really strong defensive partner to put with Owen Power. And overall, I think that's the type of player to a degree that you would need. Someone who is strong defensively, strong positionally, good around the net. And they don't got to be a great distributor because Power is going to handle the most of those exits and that part of the job. But I think it's somebody who brings calmness to a game, somebody who you can rely on, who's not going to get them into mistakes in the defensive zone. And Brodin really is one of the best defensive defenders in the NHL. So of course, that's why I would go there. But I think somebody of that ilk makes a lot of sense. When it comes to Dahlin, there's really not many players that he doesn't work with. I'm not overly concerned there. If they just put Bernard Docker up there with Dahlin to start the season, I don't really see that being much of a problem. I think that would be okay. Of course, you would want a better player there if that's possible. But I think the focus should be on getting, somebody that fits specifically with Power in those specific skill sets and needs that he needs. And of course, as you go through an entire season, your pairs are going to mix up and they're going to blend in all of that. So you can't go into an off season and pick up a specific player and be like, he's going to play 100% of his minutes or even 80% of his minutes with Power. That's just so rare with injuries and mixing up your lines and your groups. That just is not going to happen. But I think it's somebody that, if you can get the 60 to 70% range of time on ice, that would make sense. And then you can rotate other things from a defensive aspect with Dahlin, or we even see Bernard Docker work with Power in some instances. So again, it's, pairs are going to switch up. So really it's hard to just, I made this trade for this guy to be Power's partner. I'm sure going into the season on paper, written down, you're hoping that guy can play 60 to 70% of the time on ice with Power, but understanding injuries and changes and as the season goes along. And really you don't know how a pair is going to go until they play together. It's just hopeful wishing, and you have to have an openness to that flexibility. Rolling through here. Next one is a JJ Peterka question from Jess. With JJ Peterka's name in the rumor mill, would you be willing to move him? And if so, what do you think a realistic trade package would look like? So for me, I think this cuts two ways. Would me be willing to move him? Sure, for the right price. I think I'd be open to that. There's not much that I'm not open to from making a move with any player on this roster. There's maybe 3 or 4 that I would consider, 2 I would say probably I would definitely wouldn't, and then another 2 or 3 that would really have to be something nice for me to consider moving them. Peterka is not in that group. So in either one of those groups, to be clear. So I would definitely consider it. What I think is happening here, and we're hearing more and more about it, and it's something that I, brought up early when these rumors came out myself, is, I think a lot of this is an agent-driven situation. You can even say agent and player. I think this is a full press to get Peterka the best contract that they can. And they're using the leverage that they have of an offer sheet, or, we're not going to sign long term, and, all of that, to try to push that contract and that money to the best spot that they can. The Sabres were not interested in moving with the deadline, no matter what people tell you. There was nothing close to the deadline, and they are not interested currently, or don't have a desire to move him right now. Now, does that mean they haven't had conversations with teams about it? Of course not. Teams have called. they've had discussions, conversations, but it's not nearly in the area that Byram is. Not even close. And I think we're going to see this Peterka thing play out here over the first few weeks of the offseason. You never know. Maybe they come to some sort of agreement before July 1st. That would, of course, be ideal because then it takes an offer sheet out of the way. But I still think it might linger a little bit, and we'll see where that goes from there. And just as he has the secondary question that goes with this, so I'll kind of talk about that. He asked, what kind of contract do I think it would look like? And I think there's a wide window here. There's, a $6 to $9 million range that you see people bounce in and out and in between. I think if you're going to go in the 7 to 8 year range, that you're probably going to get to a number that involves an 8. On the short term side, you're probably going to get into a number that is going to be a high 6. What I think the most likely thing that happens is a 2-year contract in 6.75, 6.8, 6.9, maybe a 7 range to appease him. I think that is your most likely scenario. It then gives these two sides the chance to step away. You're married together for the next 2 years. Let's see how things go. And then it gives Peterka another opportunity to cash in again with the salary cap going up. And I think that's something we're going to have to watch a lot throughout this offseason, and something, Friedman has mentioned a couple times on his podcast, 32 Thoughts podcast, is it'll be interesting to see how many guys go long-term here in this offseason, whether it be restricted free agents or it be unrestricted free agents. Because of that increase in cap, you might not want to lock yourself in right now. Maybe you only want to go to 2-3 years and try to boom cash in again when that cap continues to rise, and therefore the salaries will continue to rise with that. If you lock in for 7 to 8 years right now, that puts you in a tough spot of cashing in on that rising money, unless you foresee that in a long-term contract and increase it on the short term. But then that becomes an issue with general managers and the short-term cap versus the long-term cap. I think what we're going to end up seeing is a lot more shorter-term contracts, the 2, 3, 4 years, than we've seen in the past. And I think Peterka is going to fall into that. It makes sense on both sides. I don't think the Sabres really have desire to go long-term with anyone. Well, I'll say that for a second. We'll get to that in a minute. But I think in terms of Peterka, I don't think there's an interest to go long-term. And I think probably on Peterka's side, there might not be a great desire to go long-term either. So I think 2 years, makes sense on both sides. Here's where I was going to next. When I mentioned the contract situation, I was talking about that, and that in particular is Alex Tuch. So this question from Tim with Alex Tuch: what is the most in years and annual average value you'd sign him for? And if he ends up not signing an extension this summer, Adams has to keep him until at least the trade deadline. No. Yes, no. So here's the situation with Alex Tuch, from what very little that I understand and have heard about this early in the process that I could share with you. I think that there is an openness to discuss a contract extension. So I think that is the first good thing. There is an openness to have that conversation. I am not in a position right now to tell you that it will get done or that, they're close or any of that. I just can tell you that there's an openness, and take that how you will. I also believe that a Tuch extension probably isn't going to be in a 7 to 8 year range. I think if it ends up getting done, you're going to be looking at something in the 5-year range. I think 5 years, $9 million sounds probably about right. Now, he's 29 years old, and hearing $9 million might be a sticker shock to some people who have lived in a cap world the last few years where, the money is not going up, where it's been almost flat, and a $9 million player, whoa, that's one of the top tier players in the league. Do I want to pay Alex Tuch, that amount of money, even how good he is at his age and what his, aging could be over the next, but in this instance would be 5 years. No, I understand that. But let's think about it this way. So if he was paid $9 million starting in the 2020, 25, 26, 27 season, the projected cap right now, not guaranteed, is $104 million. So $9 million is 8.6% of the salary cap. Okay, so if you equate that back to where we just were this season, 8.6% of an $88 million salary cap is a $7.6 million player. I think that would bring, if you understand it that way from a cap percentage, while 9 seems like a lot, with the increasing salary cap as it goes, getting over $100 million and expected to continue to grow and maybe even significantly over the next 3 to 4 years, $9 million isn't that much money. It's equivalent to a $7.6 million player this past season. I think if anybody would sign up if you could have signed Alex Tuch this past season to 5 years for $7.6 million, that cap hit percentage, you probably would have did it in a second. So if anybody, I think, has some hesitancy to the cap hit, don't. I think $9 million is fair. I think $9 million for 8.6% of the cap is perfectly reasonable for this player in this instance. Now, as I'm sitting here telling you this, you better believe that Alex Tuch's agent also knows this very thing. So does he try to push to 9.25? Does he try to push to 9.5? And that's a negotiation and the discussions we'll go through. I think the good thing is that I feel pretty comfortable saying it's not going to be 7 or 8 years to hand a 29-year-old, 30-year-old, that type of term. You don't love to see it. Although I will say we're starting to see now in this era of players play pretty well into their early to mid 30s. It's not the same type of decline that we've seen a couple of years ago. I did an article on Jason Zucker a couple months ago that I kind of went through all that age data that showed us that very thing. So, I wouldn't have concern paying him until his year 37 or 37 aged season. But if we get it down to 5 years, then only paying him until he's 35, 36 years old. And I think that probably works better for both sides. In terms of, let's say there's a scenario that he says he doesn't want to resign with you and not going to work, that's that. I disagree that you hold him to the deadline. I think if that scenario unfolds, he should move this offseason. And people are not going to like it. It's not going to be great from a PR perspective, but that is the best decision for the team. Right now in this offseason, you will get more for Alex Tuch than you will in February of next year. Just you will. Teams will get a full year with him instead of just a half season as a rental. They get a full year and they can talk to him about a contract extension. You can get familiar there and all of that. It's just more value. So while I understand from a PR perspective, you probably don't want to do that. They should 100%. And, if Adams doesn't have, the thought or the guts, let's say, that's not fair to say, but doesn't have the motivation, maybe that's a better word to go, to make that deal if he tells them, no, I'm just not going to do it, then that's why Jarmo Kekalainen's here. I think he then would have to step in and voice his opinion and push to make those hard decisions in this organization, because that is just what has to be done. That's what you have to do. It's best for this team. And, feelings aside, from Buffalo aside, wants to be here, rah, 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 aside, you have to do what's best for this team. And if this player does not want to sign and extend with you, then you have to move on and get the best return you can. So you can put a team on the ice that does, move towards being a playoff team next season. All right, our next question here comes from good friend Steve. This is a question about defensemen. Would signing unrestricted free agent Dante Fabro and trading Bo Byram for Brandt Clark fix the defense? Steve, yes and no. I think adding Fabro would be a good move, a decent move. I wrote about him last week as a free agent profile. I feel like he's a partner-dependent defenseman, which isn't the end of the world when you have Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power here. He can probably work with one of those two, and he plays on the right side. He's not going to be overly expensive, and I think that's a good fit for your team. And Clark, I don't know. Look, I think Brandt Clark is a good young player. He has upside offensively in his game for sure, but it feels like if you traded Byram for Clark, you're almost trading for a younger version of Byram. And I think Clark at this point of his career might even be a worse defensive player. And remember, we're at a point right now where we are trying to improve our team defense. So I don't think Brandt Clark gets you there. I think you're just trading skill set for skill set, and I don't know really how that helps. It puts you almost in the same situation you're in with the younger player, by the way, that doesn't have experience of playing successfully with Dahlin. I'd almost necessarily rather just keep Byram instead of, if that was all on the board was a Byram for Clark, I'd probably just keep Byram, sign him to a short-term RFA contract, and just move along and put Byram with Dahlin and hope that works the way it did this past season when they played together. So to answer the question, Fabro would help. Clark, not so much, in my opinion. I don't think that would be a fit for where they are right now and what they want to do to improve this team. Next question from Kyle, our favorite topic of Terry Pegula. He took a little bit of a punch in the face from the Athletic last week there. But the question here from Kyle is, do you think Terry is willing to spend to the cap to put together a good team? I'm honestly what's the best word here? I am so, I think tired is the right word. This conversation is just tiring to me now. In terms of the spending and the cap and all of that. Look, I'm just in the spot. Spend the money. I don't believe that they will until I see it's done. Everybody can tell me to the blue in the face, entry-level contracts, young players, this, that, whatever. Okay. Fine, great, whatever. Agree to disagree. Everybody has already staked their lines of what side of this argument they are on. We're just going to hang out and see where things happen. I think if we have another offseason here, where they sit right now with $23-ish million of cap space, and they have some restricted free agents to sign, McLeod, Peterka, Byram probably not, but Jack Quinn if they keep him, and Bernard Docker and Levi and whatever. They can work their way up to that cap ceiling pretty quickly. If they get to a point where we're let's just say where they've been. If there's $7 million under the cap again, to me it becomes pretty undeniable of what the direction is and what cap space is available for them to use. I'm not going to sit here listen to a whole nother of, don't worry, they'll use that cap in the offseason. If we have to make a move, we have the cap space, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it for 2 years. I'm not listening to it anymore. Do I think Terry will spend the money? I think he will. He would if the right situations present itself. I think he would be willing to do it if that's what it came to. I think it would take some selling from Adams. I think it would take some selling from Yarmo and the rest of that front office to do that. I guess the way to put it, and I'll just keep talking, sorry if I keep going on about it, is if there's a scenario where they can sell him on, makes sense to be a cap team this year. For a player acquisition, they need to do it. This will put them over the top. I think that they would have the flexibility to do that. But again, it's got to be the right situation. I just don't know if they have the full open capacity to just go without checking in with the owner to make sure that it's okay. I think it would be scenario driven. If I'm being perfectly honest, that's just my belief on the matter. All right, two more left. We're having fun here. I wanted to bring this one in. So Ben sent me like 6 questions. So when you do that, it becomes dealer's choice for me. And I picked the one that I want to talk about. So this one, I picked the Braeden Schneider question. Braeden Schneider, New York Rangers, 23 right shot defenseman, not burdened with any sort of no move. Seemingly in and out of the Rangers lineup, is he worth discussing as a depth option to acquire? I think it's worth discussing. I am admittedly not that high on the player as others are. He has that size. He I guess he brings a physical nature. For me, the problem is, when I've watched them play, and I will fully admit I am not somebody who studies the New York Rangers or watches them play a ton. But when I watch them play, I'm not overly impressed. I don't come away thinking about, oh man, Schneider caught my attention in that game. And then when you go look at his numbers from a defense aspect, they really haven't been that good throughout the entirety of his career. Now, if he is brought in as a third pair defense option to replace Connor Clifton or to replace Mattias Samuelsson, all right, fine. I can live with that. It shouldn't be that expensive in terms of acquisition cost or even from a salary standpoint. Sure, go ahead and do that. Thinking that he can step in and be a top 4 defenseman, I think you're pushing your luck. Again, it's 23 years old. It's a younger player here. Just not the familiarity or even the success when he has been given an opportunity to play in that role. And I just, if it gets to a point where things come off the board that you wanted to do and you miss on a few things, I don't think Schneider's the worst option if it came down to that. If he's 4 or 5 pegs down the ladder and that's what you get to because the top 4 things you want to do didn't pan out for you, fine. I think there are worse things that you could do. But like I said, overall, I'm not an extremely big fan. He's not, at least he's not on the top of my list of players that I would target. I think I would have a handful over him, but as I said, you could probably do much worse there. All right, last one. We are going to end here with a Lindy Ruff question, and this one comes from Tyler. Do you think Lindy is actually happy with his coaching staff? Do I think he's happy with his coaching staff? It's just tough. I'm trying to find the right words here. I think if I could get in, this is not anything that I know, to be very clear. I think if I can get inside Lindy's head and give him a little bit of truth serum, I think that deep down that he would like to make some changes to his coaching staff. That is what I believe. I also believe from an optics standpoint, Lindy Ruff has a 2-year contract with this team. I think it is an extreme disservice to have him for those 2 years coach with Don Granato's staff plus Seth Appert. Let the man bring in at least one person that he wants to be on the bench with him. I just think it's a terrible look to keep a coaching staff together for 3, even 4 years now. That just simply hasn't worked. Marty Wolford, if you want, the defense has gotten worse. The penalty kill is not going well. Matt Ellis, we kicked him enough around, not this past season, the one before that. Seth Happer, we know it's not really going anywhere. And then Bales, it's, he's one of the more respected goaltending coaches in the league, but like, you also have goaltenders that are regressing in your system, and he's responsible for that. So, really all of the coaches on this staff, you can make an argument that they shouldn't be on the bench next season, but June 10th, here we are, still around. And last time I checked in was a couple of weeks ago. The last I heard was no final decisions had been made. But there's been no announcements. No announcements that anybody is staying. No announcements anybody is leaving. We don't know. Teams around the league are hiring their assistant coaches to fill gaps. New head coaches are plucking people in off of wherever, collegiate, AHL, USA Hockey, wherever, they're plucking guys in to be on their staff. So really you're limiting your pool here. And for all I know, maybe they're out there trying to get guys in, they're working on it, or they've decided to go here instead of there. I don't know. Maybe that's something that's happening. But I think from an optics standpoint, it's a bad look. It's a bad look, and from a front office perspective, nobody left, and I get it. You added two, and that's great. Jarmo, Stahl, those are fine additions, fine to good for in Kekalainen's case. No, that's great, but nothing drastic happened to your coaching staff or to your front office in showing that somebody somewhere had to pay for this not being good enough. In a sense, like, someone should be a scapegoat just because, like, just to appease even. And maybe it'll happen still. There's still time from a coaching staff perspective to figure that out, to bring one new person in or two, whatever. There's still time for that. But, we're ticking through here, and we're crossing days off the calendar. And that every day goes by, it's more and more likely that staff's going to stay together. And like I said, I think that's just an extreme disservice to Ruff. Unfair, to be perfectly honest, if you ask me. All right, so that is the 9 questions that I was presented in the inbox today to go through. I do really quickly, since the next time that I will talk to you will be on Thursday, and there won't be time to get into this discussion, is to spend a few minutes here, 1 or 2 minutes, talking about the NHL Scouting Combine this past weekend. So, my first time being back in 2 years, I really missed it. It was fun. To get back there, to see some people I haven't seen in a couple of years, to have conversations, to just talk hockey with people from not only in Buffalo, but just around the country that cover the sport, different teams, to pick their brains and see where they're at. It was a good time. And, really, like I wrote about in my notes piece, and, other people have mentioned it too, this scouting combine was different. It's the first year that the draft is decentralized. So a lot of important conversations between agents and general managers took place this week. So that was pretty cool to kind of get that vibe of just, you're more on alert as people are walking around, who's in the corners having conversations on particular teams, what team executives and officials, are you seeing throughout the building, and, stuff like that. So, you're on more high alert than I guess you would be normally in a normal combine situation. From a prospects perspective, it was good to talk to a couple of guys. A couple of guys were really impressive to me. I thought Cole Reshney, when I got a chance to talk to him, was really impressionable. When I asked him about why he was going to North Dakota, he gave a really thoughtful, long answer. And, to summarize it, it was, just what he thought was best for the next point or the next step in his career. And, he took some time really, from a mental standpoint to make sure that he felt it was the best decision mentally and for his family and even for his body growth and development too. He talked about how going to collegiate hockey he thinks is better for him to try to reach that next level and get to that next stage. And he was very, very respectful of his junior team, saying it was the best 2 years of his life to this point, playing those 2 years in juniors. So, that was really cool to get that perspective. Man, who else? Justin Carbonneau. he also stood out to me. He's one of the guys that I actually got 2 minutes of just him and I having a quick conversation about a few things. He's somebody that I've mentioned in a couple articles, and I'll say here that I heard about a few months ago that he was one of the top players on that they were interested in this draft class. I heard it again recently that somebody they're interested in this draft class. Doesn't mean that he will be their pick at 9, but I think somebody that is certainly on their radar. And he's a guy that, from a system perspective, and what you already have in your prospect pool, I'm not sure it's the best fit. He's a shoot first forward winger with not a lot of, at this point, he doesn't showcase a lot of playmaking upside. But to his credit, when I talked to him, I think, he understood that's some areas in his game that he had to work on, is being a better playmaker. He said he had to get bigger, stronger, and he thought maybe get faster. And again, that's one of the reasons I think he is, like a couple of these junior players in this draft, is considering making that NCAA jump too. So right now he plays in the Q, and he told me that Boston University and Boston College and his current Q team are the 3 teams that he's going through right now, considering he hasn't made a decision yet. So, and again, I think some other parts of the conversation we had, kind of what his motivation is, of why he wants to succeed, and what really drives him was, again, for me, impressionable in the 2 minutes that we had to just converse. So that was really good. Trying to think if anybody else really stood out. Brady Martin was a good conversation. He was the talk of this draft for sure, with the whole farming thing. Definitely a riser. I would not be surprised if he is somebody who makes it into the top 5 of the draft. I think he went out to dinner with 4 teams during the combine week, if I'm not mistaken, and 4 of the 5 teams were in the top 5 of the draft. So, or maybe the top 7 of the draft. Can't remember exactly, but that wouldn't be surprising to me there. I was flipping through other parts of my notes. Yeah, not much else beyond that. Jake O'Brien was a nice conversation. He's on the smaller side from a size perspective. You can definitely tell, and he noticed that right away. I think he said before next season or next offseason. I remember exactly. I don't want to misquote him here, but he definitely said he wanted to put a good amount of weight on in terms of muscle. I think over the summer, and then by the end of next season, to make himself, to get more size for the next level, to be ready. So that's the story with O'Brien. And again, he's a guy that is around there at that 9 pick. He is going to go back and play for Brantford next season, so he will stay in juniors. But yeah, I mean, he's probably you can argue one of the top playmakers in this draft class, and he's, right around that 9 spot where he could go maybe a little bit sooner, maybe a couple of picks later. We'll see how that all shakes out, but he was another guy that stood out to me in conversations. All right. I did not think this would go 45 minutes. My throat's trying to get a little sore from all the talking here for 45 minutes. So like I said, the next time you will be hearing from me will be on Thursday for the second mock off-season episode. The voices will be back. Anthony will set up the whole offseason, and I will be in the Sabres general manager seats putting together my team. So those are fun episodes. I have some prep I have to do over the next 48 hours to make sure that I am ready to go with that for sure. Especially with how stressful just building out the written mock offseason I've gone, how much time I spent on that. I gotta really narrow in a plan and a focus. So, it's not overly difficult and doesn't take me 2 hours to put a team together. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Everybody have a good night, and we will talk again soon. See ya.